Hello everyone, this is High Priestess Tana. Thank you for tuning into Tana Temple Healing Works once again, and I'm back with the final I guess you would say installment or the final part of this video topic, which is slavery in Detroit. So I want to go delve into this article by Billy or not Billy, where did I get that from? Bill McGraw, y'all. So yeah, so basically he's trying to let his viewers know or readers know that Detroit isn't all about being part of the auto industry and beautiful artwork and statues and restaurants and beautiful places to wine and dine, and it has a history. It's not just about that, Motown Records and Underground Railroad and all is a part of it as well. And also you can't forget our Coney Islands too. So, but when it comes to the slavery aspect, yes, the Underground Railroad played a very important part, and I talked about that more in depth in the last video. So, and I think the video before that as well. But let's tap into it and talk about slavery once again. And basically, the city of Detroit basically has been around for over 300 years. But it holds a dark secret that a lot of people don't know about, and that's slavery. A lot of people don't really know that Detroit was also a part of American history that basically encompass the horrors and the trials and tribulation of slavery, right? So even people who are like college graduates may not even know about this because it may have not been. Even I've graduated from a university, and we didn't even really talk about that in the university or high school or anything like that. Not, I don't recall us talking about it at all, or if we did, it was very, very like swept up under the rug or very minimum, conversation about it. And we need to know that slavery played a key part in the growth of Detroit. It did. It just did. And a lot of wealthy Detroiters owned slaves for the first 120 years of the city's existence. And when people when people talk about slavery in Detroit, Metro Detroiters probably think of like picking cotton and, severe beatings like in the South. But when you think about it, okay, there was slavery that existed obviously in Michigan in different forms. Like I mentioned before, indentured slavery, and or indentured servants, correction, is in chattel slavery. Both existed. And it may have not been exactly how things were set up in Georgia and Mississippi, but it's something that a lot of people just don't try to talk about. And if you think about a lot of our roads and schools and communities across Southeast Michigan carry the names of the old prominent families that once ruled the city and owned slaves, like Macomb, Campaw, Bowby and McDougal, Abbott or Abad, Brush, Cass, Hamtramck, Gwen, Meldrum, DeQuinder, Beaufait, Grosbeck, Livernois, or Livernois, and Brevard, among many other streets and many other people's actual figures who existed in Detroit, and they end up having streets named after them. Okay. Even Detroit's first mayor, John R. Williams, the namesake of two streets in Detroit, John R. and Williams, owned slaves. Okay? The Catholic Church in Detroit was heavily involved in slavery. Priests owned slaves and baptized them. I talked about that, I believe, in part one or part two. No, part one of the video. Okay. And at least one slave worked on the construction of St. Anne's Church around 1800. Okay. The men who founded the Free Press when it was founded in 1831 were ex-slave owners. That's why they were so pro-slavery for, for a while. And they didn't see anything wrong with people of color, black people specifically at that time, being looked down on, as I mentioned, I believe in the last video. And the paper supported slavery during the national debate before the Civil War. The work of slaves helped build Detroit. And just like in the South, slavery in Detroit was reinforced by violence. Slaves worked without any pay for their entire lives under the threat of the lash and death. Yeah, same. I was just talking about that. That's funny that that popped up because I was saying, even though they didn't have as many slaves up here in Detroit back in the day during the slave period, it still existed. It may have been like to the I would say the amount or portion of amounts of slaves that were in the South, such as like the Carolinas or Mississippi or Georgia or Texas or anything like that, but they basically still hold significance regardless of how big or small the amount of slaves that existed here. Slavery is slavery, okay? All right. Owners used their power over slaves to steal their labor and enrich themselves. That's all slavery was. It was a money grab, and it basically was about power control, racism, and just basically just it was very sadistic. And actually slavery still exists in other parts of the world. And I just want to point that out, just to throw that out there. So yeah, slaves arrived in Detroit stripped of their identity, their culture, family, and often their name. They were frequently maimed for torture. I talked about that in part one. Slaves died often young and were buried in graveyards that were soon forgotten. See, this article is basically elaborating more on what I discussed in part one more than anything. But this is more in depth, and I really like this, how this is broken down. And then paved over by later generations of Detroiters, and their bones remain underfoot in America's blackest big city. Yes, and their stories continue to be unknown in a region where race always has been a consuming issue. Like I mentioned in the last video or the video before that, Detroit has had a lot of race riots, and Detroit, now I understand where they were coming from, because Detroit is not only had a lot of racism that existed, slavery existed, which those go hand in hand. Like if you have slavery, you have racism, you have prejudice, you have a lack of equality, you have a lack of opportunities. So all that flows together, and it's being passed down, excuse me, through the bloodline of different families, generation by generation by generation. So we hold that like the imprints or like a tapestry of all these different things that happen in our bloodlines, and it make up our personalities as Detroiters. Like I was born and raised in Detroit. And I live downriver now. I've been here for the past 10 years or so, about 10 years. But I was born and raised in Detroit, and I lived there the first part of a big portion of my life. So yeah, I moved out here when I was about 26, but I was born and raised in Detroit, and that's my home, and that's where what I know. I still know about the people there better, and different people's stories, and just the life of a native Detroiter and the hot spots and all those different things. So and I can relate to that energy better. and their stories continue to be unknown in a region where race always has been a consuming issue. That just stood out to me. That's why I read that again.